Hello and welcome back to our house for another video in the Robinson Curriculum book list series. So in this series, I go book by book down the entire RC book list and I talk a little bit about the author, the book, and what category it falls under in the RC curriculum. For those of you that are not aware, the Robinson curriculum is the curriculum that we use, we love, because it focuses on skills, not just acquiring a bunch of facts and knowledge. They work on the three main components: reading, writing, and arithmetic, and they just progress at their own speed, preferably 6 days a week, year round, and just building on those skills. And the reading part is this giant book list that starts with the McGuffeys primer, and it goes all the way up to books like Paradise Lost and Regained, like really challenging books. And they just go through them, at their speed. And they're really great books. A lot of them are in the public domain. So if you're interested in these titles, you can check them out probably for free online. But when you purchase RC, you get all of the book files so that you can print them at home. And if you have a great printer like the Epson 2750, it's really cheap. It's cheaper for me to print a book at home than it would be to even drive to the library if they had them at the library. But unfortunately, a lot of these books, you won't find them there. Some of them probably because of controversial reasons, they're just older, they make way for new books. And parents, I think, we're not always jazzed about those new books. So I want to encourage you with this book list if you're interested in it, or if you're not familiar with these authors and books and subjects, just to kind of give you a little heads up what it's about so you can feel more confident, comfortable with your kids reading these books, and just give you those little heads up and controversial things that you might hear, because everything now, right, is controversial if it was written like 150 years ago. So yeah, let's get started. I've got the next book list here. We're going from books 41 to 50, and I will link in a card and in the description down below and comments the series playlist. Now we have, about 9 authors in this little chunk. Half of them I've already talked about in previous videos because it's the same authors, and half of them are new. So I'm not going to spend much time on the names that we've already covered in previous videos. If you want to learn more about them, you can watch those videos, the other videos in the series that talk about them. And in this video, I'm just going to focus mostly on the new authors that we're introducing. All right, number 41 is the Rover Boys on a Hunt. This is under the pen name Arthur M. Winfield, but we know the author's real name, and I've talked about him in previous videos, so you can watch that one if you're interested in his story. Very interesting. Wrote a lot of books in this genre, a lot of series. So this is another Rover Boys book. Now I have here these reprints from New West Press. So I've printed books. I've briefly used the e-reader with I've gone through all the different forms of acquiring the RC books. I really love the New West Press books. They're a high quality. It's not just scanned pictures, reprints. They are beautiful, like a regular book, but just really nice. I like the covers. You can purchase paperback, sometimes hardback, and I just like the uniform look, and they're very durable, of all the white books titles. It looks really nice, right? So a lot of these you'll see New West Press, and I can link the website down below. I'm not affiliated with them. I purchased these with my own money. So honestly, I just love these. And this is under the category of literature, because remember, focusing on the 3 R's, you ask, what about all the other subjects? Well, a lot of them are covered through books on the book list, and so I'm gonna go over what category they fall under. This is just literature. All right, number 42, we have Uncle Remus Returns, and this is by Joel Chandler Harris. And I covered the controversy with Joel Chandler Harris and Uncle Remus and all of that in a previous video. I even broke it up into a clip if you want to watch it. This is a reprint. It's a really good reprint. I like it. The illustrations are really nice here. And this is under the category of social studies and literature. Now, I will say that these books are a little challenging to read, and a lot of people I know choose to do this in an audio version. I could see why, and that could be helpful. Maybe just an exception to the list. But I think the overall consensus from the last video that I made, and we talked about it, it seems like everybody across the board was just really glad that at the end of the day, the stories were documented, because they're not really getting passed down from generation to generation. So at least they're here for you in book format if you'd want to share them with your family. Number 43, I don't have because it's Jack's Ward by Horatio Alger Jr. and that falls under the social studies and literature. And I talked about why I don't purchase those Horatio Alger books in many videos. I will link them down below as well if you'd like to check it out. Moving on, number 44 is the McGuffeys Third Reader, obviously by William McGuffey. This is under the language arts category because there is obviously more here than just a book. We have actual lessons. For example, this is the Sermon on the Mount. There's a rule, while you're reading the sacred scriptures, you should consider that they are the words of the Lord and ought therefore to be read with great attention and seriousness, and also more slowly than other writings. When a word ends with S, and the next word begins with S, or has much of the sound of S, the first word must be pronounced very distinctly before you begin the second. Examples: theirs is righteousness' sake. Jesus said was said. And so you have here these sentences from the Sermon on the Mount. And the lessons are longer than the other McGuffey lessons. And then you have questions from the other books. Questions: who is Jesus Christ? What blessing did he pronounce upon the poor in spirit? What upon those that mourn? What kind of mourning does Christ refer to? And then there is a little part here where it says heirs, and that is set for sat. In most Bibles, this word is improperly printed. Set for sat, or thirst for thirst, or law, L-A-W-R for law, farthing for farthing, yeah, Y-A-Y-A for yay. So keep that note there. And then there's a spell and define list. Multitude, blessed, merciful, persecuted, and you're supposed to obviously learn how to spell that and define them. So this is more than just a book that they read through. And you can choose to do it that way, that they just read through the book and don't do the questions, don't do the spelling, or you can use this as a tool to go ahead and make them do all those things. Answer the questions, learn how to spell those words, learn their definitions. That's why it falls under the language arts category. I love these McGuffey readers. This is no way you're gonna skip a book in my list. I know the fourth, fifth ones, they get a little bit way more challenging. So this is still very perfect for this age range. Now, as you can see here, I have purchased the original McGuffeys, which has, a lot of the Bible, all of that. I believe the new revised versions will revise then. They came out without William McGuffey's consent, and they remove a lot of that out to try to make it more, I guess, inclusive or PC, whatever, even back then. So for that reason, I recommend the originals if you can find them. Number 45 is one of my favorites, Just So Stories by, I hope I am saying it right, Rudyard Kipling. And this just falls under the literature category. And this is a beautiful reprint, as you can see here, by New West Press. And it has some pictures here, some really nice pictures. The font is really nice and big. It's very unique. I have a few Just So Story reprints and books, and yeah, this is very different from the other ones. Very unique. I believe this is the only New West Press book that I have that is in this size. Now, this is the first mention of Kipling on the RC book list. I wanted to go a little bit more into detail about his life. I have some notes here. Very interesting life. He was born in 1865 and died in 1936. He was 70 years old, and he's buried in Westminster's Abbey's Poets' Corner. He's obviously British writer of short stories, novels, poems. He was a journalist, and his most notable works are The Jungle Book, Just So Stories, Kim, Captain Courageous. Captain Courageous is also on the book list. And in 1907, he won the Nobel Peace Prize in Literature, the youngest at the time at the age of 41. He married Caroline Starr Ballister, and they had 3 children, Josephine, Elsie, and John. His parents met in England, but then they moved to India, so he was actually born in Bombay. His mom, Alice McDonald, is one of the 4 noted McDonald sisters. I believe their father was some kind of a well-known minister at the time, and they really loved Rudyard Lake, and so they named their son after the lake, and they considered themselves Anglo-Indians, which is a 19th century term for British origin expats living in India. And this whole complex issue of identity and national alliance, this would be a big issue for him that would come up later in his writing a lot. Now, comment down below. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. It seems that those that are very famous writers, really great notable writers, they had really tortured lives. I mean, I can't think of many authors that just, they had a really great, happy life and they just produced these amazing works. I'm sure it's out there, I'm sure. But just by looking at these authors in this video that we have, wow, it's really sad. So with Kipling, at age 5, as was the custom at the time, you know, expats living abroad, they would send them back for boarding school or, you know, just, yeah, pretty much boarding school. So him at age 5 and his sister 3.5 years old, his sister Alice, were taken to the UK, and they lived with this couple that boarded children, and he lived there for about 6 years. And in his autobiography, he recalled the horror, the combination of cruelty, neglect, calculated torture, religious and scientific, that he endured. And so he learned that lies were necessary as part of survival. And that, he says, really fueled his literary efforts later on, you know, being imaginative and telling these stories. Now, later on, when he left that family, you know, one of his relatives asked him, why didn't you say anything? And he said something that was just really children, that, you know, children just kind of accept this cruelty and abuse as eternally established. And telling lies was just a necessary, you know, part of life. So they are afraid to tell the truth unless they're totally out of danger, right? I can understand that. And so then he went to the United Services College to prepare to go into the army, and he fell in love with the girl that was boarding with his sister and was the model of his first novel, The Light That Failed. Now, his parents couldn't afford to send him to Oxford College, so he took a job back in Bombay in the Civil and Military Gazette. So he went back to Bombay, and that's where his writing took off, and he made a lot of money, and he used it to return to London, which at the time was just the literary center of the British Empire. Now, on his way back to London, he did want to stop and kind of tour through the United States, and he went, you know, going through Japan, and he wrote about how he lost his heart to a geisha visiting Japan on the way to San Francisco. Then he traveled the US, writing articles for the Pioneer, and he actually met up with Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens. So they had a good chat. At age 26, he married Carrie Ballister in the thick of the influenza epidemic. And so this is the time where he said undertakers in 1892, they ran out of black horses for funerals and they had to settle for brown horses. It was quite a time to get married. But they settled in Vermont, very modest living. They were expecting their first child. They lived on this $10 a month cottage with a farm up in Vermont, and that's really where he got all his ideas for the Jungle Book and other books. They traveled a lot. He visited South Africa before settling in Sussex. And this house in the country had no bathroom, no running water, no electricity, and he loved it. But reading this, I wondered, did his wife love it though? Now, on a visit to US in 1899, Kipling and his daughter, Josephine, sadly got really sick. She developed a really bad case of pneumonia from which she eventually died. Now, obviously you can imagine he was devastated, and in the wake of her death, that's when he wrote Just So Stories for Children. Now, it was called For Little Children, and Kim also, that book. And I thought this was really interesting too, that he scripted the first royal Christmas message delivered by King George V in 1932. Now, here's a little bit that I was like, I didn't know this. He was deep in Freemasonry. He received 3 degrees of craft masonry, but also the side degrees of Mark, Master Mason, and Royal Arc Mason. I don't know anything about this. And lest you think, maybe that's not true. He loved the experience so much, he wrote the poem, The Mother Lodge. So you could check that out for yourself. Moving on to World War I, they asked him to write kind of some pro-British propaganda things, and he did, but he was critical of both sides. And unfortunately, his son died in action, John, at age 18. Now, he had been turned down for the Royal Navy twice because of poor eyesight. But then he went to the Army. And again, the officers rejected. But Kipling, pulled some strings, made a request, and they accepted him. And he was last seen stumbling through the mud blindly with possibly a face injury. And at first, they weren't sure if he really was, killed in combat, and then they found him, confirmed it. And then he wrote epitaphs of the war. And one of the chilling statements from that book is, if any question why we died, tell them because our fathers lied. And so people are, kind of divided on this. Did he mean that because his son died because his father kind of lied to get him in? Or I think the other popular opinion was they were not really prepared for war. It was kind of a lie that they could go into this, and so a lot of people died. It was a very, very bad war. All wars are bad, right? But the way that all played out and how that led to World War II, I think that's a very good statement here. Our fathers lied. He was very much anti-communist, but the Russians still loved his writing style. And he just kept writing in the 1930s. And then 1936, he suffered a hemorrhage in a small intestine. He had surgery for it, but then he died. And he is buried next to the graves of Charles Dickens and Thomas Hardy, like I said, over in the Poets' Corner of Westminster Abbey. So that is my very brief summary. There is a lot about Kipling online. Very famous, like I said, he wrote a lot, so you can read more about him online. But that, I hope, gives you a little bit more appreciation when you get to this book, how he wrote this in such a devastating time after the loss of his daughter. And I guess it was like a tribute to her. Just those stories, and then it's been cut off, the original title, Just Those Stories for Little Children. All right, moving on to number 46 is Hans Brinker or The Silver Skates, and this is by Mary Dodge, a new author in the book list as well, so we'll talk about her for a little bit. Mary Mapes Dodge was born August 26, 1831, and she was a very popular American children's author, best known for that book, Hans Brinker. But she was a very much recognized leader in the juvenile literature movement for almost a third of the 19th century. Now, here's what's really interesting. She was able to persuade many great writers to contribute to children's magazines, such as Mark Twain, Louisa May Alcott, Robert Louis Stevenson, Henry Longfellow, and scores of others. In fact, one day, Rudyard Kipling told her a story of the Indian jungle, because he grew up there, and Dodge asked him to please write it down. So, kind of some hesitation. This was for St. Nicholas magazine. He had never written for children before, but he did it, and thus was born The Jungle Book. So I thought that was really interesting. And after the death of her husband, Dodge turned to writing as a way to earn money to be able to educate her son. She had, I believe, 3 sons. So she wrote poems, articles for magazines, and books. She was born in New York City. And so back then, girls didn't go to school, but they were educated at home with a governess or a tutor. In 1851, she married William Dodge, who was a lawyer from New York City, and they had 2 boys. 1857, though, he faced financial difficulty, and he actually left his family in 1858, and they found him a month later. Apparently, he had drowned. So again, more tragedy, right? And one of her sons died in 1881, but the other was a successful inventor and manufacturer in Pennsylvania. And her daughter-in-law was the sculptor of the Good Fairy statue in 1916, I believe. Now, she suffered from a long illness for several months, and so she retreated to a cottage that she had, thinking that would do her good, but she just grew weaker and weaker until her death in August 21, 1905. Dodge is best known for just writing about childhood, interpreting childhood. And her big thing was you must build yourself around the humanity of childhood. Now, I've realized that I haven't really shared what my kids have thought of these books. I probably should. You know, Uncle Remus, that's challenging. The McGuffeys readers, they like these early ones. They get a little bit more challenging and they don't enjoy them as much, but they know they have to read them as we go on. But they love Just So Stories. That's a favorite. The Rover Boys books, you know, hit or miss, but they all really did enjoy Hans Brinker. It's a really sweet story. Number 47 is A Boy Knight, A Tale of the Crusades by G.A. Henty. That's in the literature and world history, and I accidentally grabbed the wrong book. This is The Cat of Bubastes, so obviously not this one. And we already talked about G.A. Henty before. I think this is maybe the first time introduced on the list, but I have a whole video. I go more in depth into his life. It's very interesting. And again, this reoccurring theme, right? He had a very difficult childhood. He was very ill in bed most of the time. And so, you know, this is how he became a really great writer. And his work is really excellent if you want to learn about history in this historical fiction way. I think his writings just really do a great job of reflecting the time period, the morals of the Victorian era. So I will link that video for you to watch. It's very interesting. Number 48 is Tom Swift and His Submarine Boat. Again, Victor Appleton, which is a pen name. I've already talked about him. You can go back and watch that video. And this is in the literature category. All right, 49. This is a big book here, Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. This is the first time she's introduced in the book list. And so I have some notes to share with you about her. Again, with the theme, hard life. You know, it produced these amazing works of literature. Now, this is under the literature category. Now, she's obviously a very famous author, so you probably know a lot about her already. So I was trying to dig deep into some things you might not know about her. I certainly did not know a lot about this. So let's get into it. November 29, 1832, she's born. She's an American novelist, short story writer, and poet, best known for Little Women and the sequels such as Little Men and Jo's Boy. Some of these sequels are in the RC book list as well. She was raised in New England by her transcendentalist parents and grew up among well-known intellects such as Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry Longfellow. Alcott's family always had financial difficulties, and so she had to work later to support the family, and her writing was sort of her outlet. Now, she was successful from her writing in the 1860s. I think she wrote under the pen name A.M. Bernard, under which she wrote the sensational novels of passion and revenge. Little Women came out in 1868, and it's set in Alcott's home in Massachusetts, and it's loosely based on her own childhood experiences with her three sisters. Now, she was an abolitionist and a feminist and remained unmarried through her life. All her life, she was active in reform movements as temperance and women's suffrage. Now, trying to understand where she's coming from, her dad's opinions on education for girls, and tough views on child rearing, plus with his moments of instability, really shaped this desire for Louisa to reach perfection, which I guess is a goal of transcendentalists. I don't know, but his own attitude towards Louisa's wild side and independence, along with his inability to provide, created a lot of conflict with his wife and daughters. So the mom, Abigail, chalked it up to the inequality of sexes and really impressed this on Louisa, which you could see fueled this feminist drive in her. Now, poverty made it necessary for her to work. She was a seamstress, I think governess, domestic helper, you know, but writing was her outlet. And her first book was Flower Fables in 1849. Now, there's a famous quote that she said around this time period, which was, "I wish I was rich, I was good, and we were all a happy family this day." And it seems like one of her big drives in life was just not to be poor, to overcome poverty. Now, in 1847, her family were station masters for the Underground Railroad, and they housed a fugitive slave for 1 week. And they even had discussions with Frederick Douglass. I did not know that. And she became the first woman to register to vote in Concord, Massachusetts in a school board election. Now, the 1850s were really hard for her. In 1857, she was unable to find work and was in such despair that she even contemplated suicide. But during that year, she read Elizabeth Gaskell's biography of Charlotte Bronte, and she found many parallels to her own life from hers. And I think that kind of gave her this drive again. Now, when the Civil War broke out, she was a nurse, but halfway through the time period she wanted to volunteer, she contracted typhoid and became deathly ill. She almost died, but recovered. So after her service as a nurse, Alcott's father wrote a heartfelt poem called To Louisa May Alcott from her father. And in it, he talks about how he's so proud of her for helping the soldiers and for just being this constant, cheerful, loving presence in the home. And just how she would always be in his heart for being a selfless daughter. Now, Little Woman, Jo is loosely based on herself. She never married though, even though the character in the book married. However, she did have a romance with a young Polish man who is nicknamed Laddie, and she wrote in detail about him in her journals, but then deleted it all, I guess burned it or something, by Alcott herself before her death. More tragedy when her sister Mary had an untimely death in 1879, and Louisa took in her niece, her daughter, as a baby and cared for Lulu for the next 8 years until Louisa passed away. So Lulu was 8 years old when she then had to go to Europe and be reunited with her father. Alcott is very much part of this woman's writer in the Gilded Age who candidly wrote about women's issues, and they were considered a sign of the time. People have said that her books are part of the very best of books to reach the hearts of young of any age from 6 to 60. Now, people think that she might have gotten mercury poisoning after she had typhoid fever because part of the cure was this compound that contained mercury. Now, people say, well, that won't kill you, but it caused, people think, an autoimmune disorder. And in 1870, there's a portrait of her, and people think it looks like she has signs of lupus, but there's obviously no evidence. But her last words right before she had a stroke at age 55, she was only 55 in Boston, was, is it not meningitis? So then that was it. She had a stroke, died in 1888, and she's buried in the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery in Concord Hillside, known as Author's Ridge. So that is book 49, Louisa May Alcott. This one takes a while to read. We have a reading log for each kid, and they write the day that they start the book and they finish it. And it's nice to just kind of keep track and see how long it takes them, their reading speed. And this one is always one that is going to take a while for them to get through, maybe a whole month. All right, number 50, another one in the literature/social studies category. We have Bob, Son of Battle by Alfred Olivence. I hope I'm saying it right. Sorry if I'm pronouncing it right. Now, there's not a lot about him. I tried to find what I could. He's another English author in 1898, very popular in the UK and the US. Now, this book originally was written in Cumbrian dialect and then translated over. The name was Ode Bob. And so it's a rendering of the phrase Old Bob in the dialect style. Now, this book, basically, it's the rivalry between two sheepdogs, from what I understand. It's kind of a sad story with the character David. His mother dies, leaving him with just his angry alcoholic father, who is the owner of Red Wool, a huge violent dog who herds sheep by force. And then there's another master, James Moore, who has a dog called Bob, Son of Battle. And so David's kind of torn between the two. James Moore acts more like a surrogate father to David. David becomes romantically interested in Moore's daughter. They become romantically intrigued with each other, and the dogs compete for the shepherd's trophy. But complications arise. Both dogs are the suspect of a rogue dog that is killing sheep. Now, Alfred Olivant was born in Sussex in 1874. and he became an author after a horse riding injury ended his military career. He did write a sequel to this book. It's called Danny in 1902, and he also wrote for magazines and died in London on January the 19th of 1927. That's really all I could find about him. It's interesting why there's a lot about some authors and not so much about others, but that's what I could find. Now, as far as reactions from my kids, one of my daughters thought that this book was really violent and she didn't like it. But one of my other daughters thought it was fine. So it will just depend, I guess, how sensitive your kids are to some of the imagery, some of the things, because like I said, this involves a rogue sheep killing dog. But yeah, it is what it is. Now, these sort of videos, you might not realize it, take a lot of time of research and filming, editing, all of that. So if you enjoy this series, please make sure that you give it a thumbs up and comment down below your favorite book from this list to help out in the algorithm. No matter what, I don't think anybody can deny that these books have an important place in history. If you're interested in the Robinson curriculum and want to learn more about it, I have a free 13-part video course linked down below where you can check it out. Now, while you're waiting for the next installment in this series, I highly recommend to go back and watch, if you haven't already, the first videos where we talk about some of these other authors, as well as the controversial history of G.A. Henty. And I'll see you in those videos. I'll talk to you soon. Bye. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe before you leave. And I invite you to join my membership site, which is named after Ella Francis Lynch organization. This one's called the Modern League of Teacher Mothers. And I host their live Q&As, coffee chats. We have book clubs, read aloud selections for kids, as well as just special additional training workshops, private videos from me. And you can also have access to my 26 video course, Sustainable Homeschooling 101. And really all of it, the course and the membership site focuses on content, no burnout zone, on being sustainable, sticking to what is essential, what is important, work habits, study habits, morals, the 3 R's, simplicity at its best, right? All of that in this membership site. So I hope you will join me there, and I'll see you soon. Bye.